Hi Anushka, welcome to the podcast. So we went to the same school, and you work as a podcast producer, and you read a lot of books, and you are especially interested in history and biology. So we are just going to talk about history, basically, particularly early history. There's this book that you recommended. What was it? Early Indians.
So the name of that book is Early Indians, and it's written by Tony Joseph. Um,
Okay.
and I'll just quickly talk about what that book is about, right?
No, no, take your time.
Early Indians is a book about uh, human beings. So
Right.
I'm sure a lot of the people who are going to be listening or watching this episode have heard about the book Sapiens, written by Yuval. I don't remember the rest of his name. So it's like three names, right?
Very
So
exotic, Anushka.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So the subject matter of both these books are very similar. So
yeah.
they basically it just traces the journey of humans as organisms throughout to this point that we are at right now.
Homo,
And yeah,
Homo sapiens, na?
yeah, Homo sapiens, yeah.
Yeah.
And Sapiens is a book which covers the same subject matter, but on a larger scale, that is on a global scale. And Early Indians is a book which covers that same subject matter, but with respect to only the Indian subcontinent.
Mm.
So a lot of content overlaps, and something I like to do is that I like to read um, two or three books from the same subject matter, because then a lot of content that overlaps, it gets really solid, it gets
Yeah,
registered in my head, right?
yeah,
So you're like, oh shit, I read that in the other book, and then
right.
you really remember that, you know what,
Yeah.
you the reading that you're doing is actually you remember a lot of it. So I think Early Indians is something that everybody definitely, if you're interested in nonfiction, it's something that you most definitely should read. And it just covers a lot of things. So it covers the fact that we did migrate from Africa. So does Sapiens. And one of the ways it establishes that is, it's a very interesting piece of information I read, which I had no idea about before that point. Is that just like you can trace the Y chromosome up the ladder from your father to his father to his father to his father, and you can go up till whatever point.
My
Uh,
chromosome is what men are born with, right?
Yeah, so if you get a Y chromosome when the egg fertilizes, that's when it becomes a boy.
Okay.
So a girl can't have a Y chromosome. It's not biologically possible. It is possible, but then the whole conversation about uh, what that fetus is exactly becomes a whole other discussion, but that's a completely different thing. So similarly, you can also trace your lineage uh, on your maternal side. And how can you do that? That's a very interesting piece of information I read on Early Indians, which I again read in Sapiens, which I again read in the book The Gene by Siddharth Mukherjee. He's an oncologist. He's a medical oncologist, and he's written a couple of books on cancer and on gene, and they're really great books. I would again highly recommend it if you would want to know about cancer or genes in general. So that piece of information is, coming back to the point, that the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of
What
the cell,
happened?
exactly. This is the only thing you remember. This is the only thing I remember, right? So, which is the powerhouse of the cell, also has its own set of chromosomes, its own set of genes,
Yeah.
right? So that just gets duplicated as it is.
Hmm.
You Just like in a normal chromosome setting, we get uh, so half of them
23
from
pairs
dad,
of, yeah.
half, half of them from our mom. But in the mitochondria, we exclusively get that from our mom.
Really?
So for example, I have a brother,
Yeah.
and he also has that same mitochondria and the same set of genes, and I also have that same mitochondria and same set of genes, but only I get to pass it down to my daughter and my son. But
Oh,
then again, my son won't be able to pass it down, but my daughter would be able to pass it down. So
okay.
that way you can work up. and that's how you can identify your maternal line. And that's how we, as humans, we realize that, if we trace all the mitochondrial DNA we have right now on earth, it goes up and it goes to a single point, and that woman is called mitochondrial Eve. And it's a beautiful name because it again takes inspiration from the Bible, and it
Right.
takes inspiration from science, and it mixes it up.
Yeah.
So mitochondrial Eve is the single woman who you can trace back to. All people on earth right now, we can trace back to her. And that's something that was a very interesting piece of information to me, because I had no idea. I always thought that, maybe that's the reason we have a patriarchal system, because it's easy for us to track our paternal lineage. But now that I know that you can actually, track your maternal lineage as well, and that patriarchal system doesn't, for all, like, keeping all the other reasons aside, purely from a scientific point of view, we can do both. But
Yeah.
somehow, I had no idea about the other part. I only knew about the Y chromosome part. And we were told that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, but we were never told that you actually have a separate set of genes and chromosomes in the mitochondria as well. So that was something that was very interesting. And yeah, so again, it's full of similar pieces of information. It talks about the Harappan civilization. Um, it talks about how Homo sapiens migrated throughout India. So they basically came from the Middle East, and then they traveled to the east of Asia. That's the side. That's Vietnam and the likes.
Yeah.
And then they traveled through the coast down, and then that's how they went to Australia. So that's after India, they went to Australia and
Because the
Europe.
continents were merged at that time, right?
No, they weren't merged. They had to build boats and stuff.
Oh, okay.
But that's how they traveled there. And Europe, ironically,
Yeah.
as mentioned in Sapiens as well, was the last place to get colonized by Homo sapiens.
Okay.
So that's a huge irony in itself.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so
Okay.
it's a very Homo sapiens. I'm saying Early Indians is a very great book, and it's much quicker to read as well, because Sapiens is a very thick book,
Yeah.
and Early Indians is
Yes.
comparatively much smaller,
Yeah.
and you can finish it rather quickly if you're into that subject matter, obviously. And then if you want, you can read Sapiens before or after that.
Yeah.
So I would recommend that this one book is a must read, in my opinion.
You read a lot of books on history. I don't
Oh
think.
yeah, I do. So I think a couple of books after Early Indians, I stumbled upon this author Abraham Early, and he wrote this book, Emperors of the Peacock Throne. So it's a very thick book. So I'll just show it to you.
Yeah, no problem.
So it's a pretty thick book in itself, and the text is small as well. So it's pretty small.
So are you trying to
And
discourage people?
no. But what I'm getting to my point. So my point is that, first of all, it's history.
Yeah.
Secondly, it's thick as fuck book.
Yeah.
Third, the text is small as well. And even then, I could just read through the book just very easily, purely because
Oh,
this author writes it in a certain way
okay.
that it feels like as if uh, the two of you are having a conversation, and he's just telling you stuff, and you are absorbing that information. So again, in this book, I came across all these emperors, and all the characteristics that these emperors have. And again, everybody loves Akbar. So
Right.
the chapters on Akbar, I absolutely adored those chapters. And something that I had no idea was that these people know that Akbar was a very secular king. So he
Right.
respected all religions, and he was not that consumed by his own religion. But something that I found in this book that I had no idea before was, after he died, he was buried in Sikandra, I think.
Right.
And uh, that area is inhabited by Jat and Gujar people. Back then, that area was inhabited by Jats and Gujar people. And so I think a small number of Jats came, they looted his grave, and then they set fire to his remains. So the interesting part in this story was that he truly was a secular king, because although he was a Muslim and he died a Muslim, but eventually his last rites were performed as if he was a Hindu. He was burned, his body was burned. So yeah, so that was also another good piece of information I had no idea about.
Yeah.
And I think earlier we were having a conversation with Aurangzeb as well. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I
He
mean,
was the opposite of Akbar, right?
yeah, so a very strong idea people have about Aurangzeb is that he was a very conservative king and he was a very strict Muslim. He Kings before him used to indulge in drinking and smoking opium and all of that. Aurangzeb was strictly, I don't do that sort of thing, because obviously that's not allowed in Islam.
Yeah.
So he's like, I'm not going to do any of this. And, I'm a strict Muslim. And that image of him was so strong that as a king, when he destroyed temples and when he destroyed important monuments, it was made into a religion thing,
Yeah.
instead of just a power thing. The fact that he was destroying these temples, in my opinion, again, this is my opinion, the
Yes.
fact that he was destroying these temples and these important monuments once he was done capturing a piece of land was to show dominance. It was to show that I'm actually at power now, instead of him being a Hindu hater or something like that, because he did have Hindus in his army. And again, another thing that that is still a very strong conversation is that Shivaji, right? So Shivaji is taken to be as the opposite of Aurangzeb, that he was the antidote to what Aurangzeb stood for.
Right.
And they did not like each other. They were at war throughout their times. But it was again a power thing. It was one king who was standing against another king, instead of being one Hindu who was standing another Muslim.
Right.
Because a lot of Muslims were a part of Shivaji's army, and a lot of Hindus were a part of Aurangzeb's army.
Okay.
So it had nothing to do with religion. We tend to add these bits into stories to make it more impactful, but in honesty, most of the conflicts that have happened in the past have always been a power issue, and they've almost never been a religious issue. So people just want land, people just want money, people just want to show other people down, for example. But religion is just as a scapegoat, I think, most of the time, to make sense of things.
Right.
So yeah, that was another thing and this is something I came across in the same book, that actually that's not true. They did have they have people in their armies of all the religions. So when blood flows, it's blood. It doesn't have to be if it's a Hindu's blood or a Muslim's blood. You fight for your king and you die. And that's that.
Okay, so
So,
let
yeah.
me ask you one question. Is there any point in asking what if Hitler was never born, or shit like that history would have changed?
It's we like to live in a world where we get to think what if, and I think that reminds me of what if series by Marvel as well, because you have Avengers on the side and you love it, but then you can't stop asking what if this was that, and what if this wasn't true, and what if this didn't happen this way.
Yeah.
And Hitler wasn't born, a lot of things won't have happened. But if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't have the examples we have now. And as sad as it is, we being in the present can't do much about it. We can only talk about how wrong it was, but we can't that's all we can do. We can learn from that and we can try to not repeat it, because something as huge as the Holocaust actually happened, and it wasn't a fictional movie. I
Hmm.
mean, it wasn't something that came out of an imagination. It
Right.
wasn't a science fiction shit. Something that horrendous did happen, and that teaches us that it's possible. We are capable of doing something like that, and we should learn from that, and we should try to not let that happen.
Yeah.
Which is so sad, because a lot of countries currently on earth are moving in that direction. They are based on their religious ideologies or whatnot. I mean, it could be any kind of ideology. If you follow that with that extreme approach, I
Yeah.
think we can end up in that situation again. And that's what we need to learn from history. We should not fantasize about how we can change that, because that's obviously, that's again, it's just imagination. You can't do anything about that. I think that again brings us to the conversation we had about Aurangzeb. Like
Right.
he was destroying these temples, and um, as we were talking before, so when I started reading, when I actually started this, so I've started reading relatively recently. So like a year or two ago, I actually started reading. Before that, I just couldn't concentrate for that long enough time. So back when I started reading in a very like overproductive sense, I made a page on Instagram, and I was like, dude, I'm going to post about all the things I read on this in this book. And that's when I started reading the Empress of the Peacock Throne. And I would obviously post about all these Muslim rulers and how some of them were great, how some of them uh, were not that great. And a lot of DMs I would get back then when I would talk about Aurangzeb, for example, were, yeah, but even Akbar in that sense. Although everybody loves him, but a lot of people who don't, there are a lot of people who don't love him as well. So a lot of DMs I would get back then were, you know, I'm from Varanasi, and you know, when back in this is so and so year, when Aurangzeb came to the city, he destroyed this very famous temple, and this and that. And I was like, dude, that's done. He was a ruler back then. There was no democracy as we know it. He can do whatever we used to invade lands back then. Imagine if we can do that now. We can never even think about doing that now. We live in a democracy now. We have proper borders, and we respect those borders again. Not within countries, I would say. Just think about within India itself. And we can't do that stuff now. We can't invade land. We can't be like, ये मेरा राज्य है, मैं ये करूंगा, मैं यहाँ का राजा हूँ, मैं कोई भी rule set कर सकता हूँ. We can't do that shit now.
Right.
Back then, that was acceptable. So, based on those standards, what he did was right by him. Like, I want more money, I want more land, I'm going to do that. And also, if I can strike a fear, if I can strike dominance, if I can throw power in faces of these people who have just acquired, I will do that by destroying the most important thing in their city. And I think that's a very logical way to do things. I mean, you don't, if you just think about it from a very binary term and just put all the emotions out of it, it makes sense to me. If I was the ruler, and if I was somebody who had the ideologies of Aurangzeb, I wouldn't have been like, अच्छा आप अपना temple रख लो please, and आप just cooperate with me, मेरे साथ cooperate करो, and जो भी मैं order दूंगा बस सुन लो. Doesn't work like that. Never did work like that before. तो वो तो dominance show करने के लिए ऐसी चीजें करेगा, which now if we think about it, like, अरे यार, from a history point of view, अगर वो monument छोड़ देता, we could have gone there. I could have gone and seen that place, you know, and it's such a loss. But then again, it is what it is. Same conversation comes down to the current CM of UP, Adityanath, changing names of cities. I don't get it. I genuinely don't get it. I mean, just let it be Allahabad. You don't need to change it to Prayagraj. How can you decide how long back you want to go and change that name to that point? So I think Prayagraj's name was changed to Allahabad by Akbar, if I'm not wrong. So how can you decide कि मैं अकबर के आने के just पहले जो नाम था मैं वही नाम रखूंगा and not 100 years before that? or 200 years before that. ये कैसे decide होता है? ये तो आप अपने convenience के या अपने thoughts के साथ उसको align करके change कर रहे हो ना. Then again it becomes a personal point वाला चीज आ जाता है कि मेरा point of view skewed है because I want things to be a certain way, तो मैं उस हिसाब से conveniently decide कर रहा हूँ. Which shouldn't be the case when it comes to countries or cities or government. That's the whole point of creating a government. It's supposed to be a separate entity with no religious or personal matters whatsoever. So I think, yeah, I mean, that's that, changing history. And then after Mughals, the Britishers came as well, so they also made a lot of changes. I mean, matlab,
Before
that's
that,
another.
I would like to add one more thing. Like we live in a very PC society, so we think about history in terms of the conditions we are living in today, like how good relatively everything is. So why was it? Why did Aurangzeb did that? They did not. They do not take into account the circumstances that surrounded him, and yeah. So and coming to the Adityanath point, I think that it's just because of votes.
Whatever the masses want, matlab ki I think even before he did that, people had never thought about it. मतलब
Yeah.
कौन किसके पास इतना टाइम है को कोई ये सोचने बैठे कि यार मैं चाहता हूँ कि मेरी सिटी का नाम चेंज हो जाए.
And क्या
अगर हो
impact
जाता
होएगा
तो
उससे?
बहुत
कुछ
बढ़िया.
फर्क पड़ता है?
किसी को फर्क नहीं पड़ता. And it's actually inconvenient
Right.
because now I have to consciously think and say Prayagraj if I want to be politically correct. And I can't go with my emotional thing that I identify with Allahabad as its name. And I used to go back to my mom's from Allahabad, so when I used to go back to my nanny's place for
Yeah.
my summer break, that's the memory I have. And Allahabad tab yahi baat chalti thi. And now when I want to talk about it, so my cousins live in Allahabad still, and when I'm talking to them, sometimes or most of the time I say Allahabad, and then they correct me, and I'm like, dude, just shut the fuck up, man. Let it be.
Right.
Let me identify with what I want to identify it with. And tumko prayagarshi to tum bolo. But it's actually inconvenient for me personally, and for people I don't know. Jaise ki, just like New Year's ke baad, you for the first month you keep writing the wrong year. 2019
Yeah, yeah,
versus
yeah, yeah.
2020 लिखते हो ना, तो I
Right.
think वही बात हो जाती है कि मैं इलाहाबाद बोलती हूँ, then I have to correct myself कि अरे नहीं, actually मतलब correct word is Prayagraj now. So it's
And
more
don't you think
inconvenient.
this is just a way to like undermine the religious minorities by changing names symbolically, trying to show
वो
how
तो यार,
superior it is?
I think that's a completely different discussion. So अगर मैं सिर्फ इसको एज एन आइसोलेटेड चीज लूं कि यार किसी सिटी का नाम चेंज हो रहा है, तो दैट इज डजंट नेसेसरली हैव टू बी अंडरमाइनिंग अ माइनॉरिटी. बट अगर मैं स्पेसिफिक केस देखूं, फॉर एग्जांपल व्हाटएवर योगी आदित्यनाथ is trying to do with Allahabad, या फिर I think a couple of I think last year I also read this piece of news that ताजमहल के पास कोई म्यूजियम बन रहा है which will have artifacts related to Mughals, but उसका नाम शिवाजी होगा, म्यूजियम का नाम. So I was like, yeah, मतलब makes personally it makes no sense to me. उसका नाम कुछ वैसे रखो, but what's the point? तो इस केस में स्पेसिफिकली आई फील कि ये बस कुछ भी हो रहा है. देयर इज नो रियल लॉजिक टू इट. हाँ, मतलब दैट्स इट लीव्स मी स्पीचलेस एट टाइम्स. मतलब ये शिवाजी वाली बात, इट लेफ्ट मी स्पीचलेस कि मतलब ब्रो, डू यू इवन नो व्हाट यू आर डूइंग? कुछ सोच के कर रहे हो कि बस जो भी मन में आ रहा है वो चल, कुछ भी चल रहा है.
Acha, what are your views on this bill, National Citizenship Act?
No, I don't think I can comment on that because I've not read enough. I just feel that the violence related to this bill should not have happened. A lot of people died. And the pieces of news I used to read back then, it was horrible. So there was a piece of news I read where जो ये शिवनगर में, I think शिवनगर में हुआ था violence, right? So एक कोई फैमिली थी जिनमें जिनमें उनका जो लड़का था, he went out for something, he never came back home, and then that violence happened, and then जब that violence was over, people were out of their house, they were searching for the people who were lost, and they couldn't find their son. And then hospitals, कुछ hospitals है जहाँ पे जो specifically इस चीज के लिए थे कि यार यहाँ इस violence से related जो भी medical emergencies हुई हैं, ये 2 या 3 गंगाराम था I think, या 1-2 hospital थे, वहाँ पे you can go and ask if they have somebody you know, if they're treating somebody you know. And I read stories like के नाली में they could just find a severed spinal cord. मतलब या फिर when the family went to the hospital, they could so bodies पड़ी थी identify करने के लिए, and they could only see feet of like one of the bodies, and I was like, that is so disturbing, and I just can't imagine to be that family member who has to hop from hospital to hospital trying to figure out, just praying that okay fine, अगर मर भी गया तो कम से कम body तो मिल जाए, so that I can rest कि I found this person, I can get that closure. And this was something that I just couldn't digest. I can't comment on the bill. With the information I have, which again I'm saying it's not the full information. I don't have not read about it properly yet. But what I know is that you can't say that we will let in certain people and we won't let in certain people. अगर आप किसी को अपने कंट्री में रेफ्यूज दे रहे हो तो आप खुल के दो, चाहे वो कहीं से भी आए. ठीक है वो मुस्लिम है और वो मुस्लिम मेजोरिटी कंट्री से ही आ रहे हैं, बट वो फिर भी रेफ्यूज लेने आ रहे हैं. हाउ शुड इट मैटर कि उनका रिलीजन क्या और उनके कंट्री का मेजर रिलीजन क्या? उनको दे नीड एन एस्केप फ्रॉम दैट प्लेस एंड दे आर कमिंग टू यू फॉर प्रोटेक्शन. यू गिव देम प्रोटेक्शन. या तो आप मना कर दो कि हम किसी को भी नहीं देंगे, वी डोंट वांट टू डू दैट शिट. या तो आप बोलो कि अगर हम दे रहे हैं रेफ्यूज तो हम सबको देंगे. बट अगेन आई विल स्टिल से कि I've yet to properly read up about it. तो मैं बहुत ज़्यादा नहीं मतलब इस पे बोल
Actually,
सकती.
they are questioning citizenship of Muslims who are still living in India, who have been living since partition.
But I think इसमें there's a lot of misinformation as well. तो कुछ चीजें है ना वो out of proportion भी है. तो वही बात है ना कि when you're making your case, you sometimes tend to over exaggerate things so that you can
Especially
get
on
support.
religion.
वो दोनों साइड पे होता है. वो गवर्नमेंट के साइड पे भी हुआ है और वो जो द पीपल आर फाइटिंग द गवर्नमेंट ऑन दिस बिल वो उस साइड पे भी हुआ है. तो आई थिंक मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन प्लेज अ वेरी लाइक बिग role in this whole problem that there is. But हाँ, बस my underlining thing is कि यार there is no need for violence to happen, and violence will be ऐसी that you can't find your 14-16-year-old kid who you sent out to buy some groceries and shit और अभी वो घर ही नहीं वापस आया उसके बाद.
Let's convert the tone to a lighter one. Yeah, so what do you think was the impact of Britishers? Was it good or bad?
I think mostly it was bad, and I've only read one book about it. That's again by Shashi Tharoor, so I think he has a slightly good point of view on that. And I've read like blogs and I've watched videos, but I think mostly it has been bad. कहने को कह सकते हैं कि we got civilized and we had the government set up and all that. The government that a lot of the structure of government that we have currently, a lot of things we've been following since the time of Akbar came. So even before the Britishers came, we had a very good skeletal structure of that thing already. So उस respect में I don't think a lot was contributed, but a lot of bad, negative things were given to us. So our obsession with fair skin, I think that's where it comes from. Our obsession with English as a language and defining a class, that comes from the Britishers. I think the fact that the gap we had between religions was increased so much that now that one country was created into 3 countries is what comes from the British. And I think, yeah, and
Divide
a
and
lot
rule.
of, yeah, and a lot of resources and money and people were taken out of our country for their benefit, and we've incurred a lot of losses with respect to just manpower. We've incurred a lot of losses with respect to what we could have been.
Yeah.
So, but then that comes back to our earlier conversation. What could have been can be the case with anything. So I don't know how it would have been if the Britishers hadn't colonized us. But what I definitely know is that we would have developed at a much faster rate, and we would have been a very highly civilized country without the help of Britishers. Uh, and I think that I think we can say that for all the other colonies.
Yeah, fuck the
Uh,
Britishers.
हाँ ब्रिटिशर्स आई थिंक वो यूरोप का ही प्रॉब्लम ही यही है बी इट ब्रिटिश पीपल बी इट पोर्चुगीज बी इट आई थिंक फ्रेंच पीपल कॉलोनाइज्ड couple of places as well तो वो because they lacked the resources so they went out and they looked for places where there was abundance of resources and we had a
So they thought of it as their moral duty to civilize the world.
that's
That's
a
what
way of
they felt.
that's a nice way to put it
Yeah,
it's a very good way to put it but they wanted resources
yeah,
they
of
went
course.
out and they took it so in their defense again you do what you want to do matlab um, they wanted something they went out and they took it and we irrespective of having all those resources somehow turn of events happened and we ended up being colonized although we had much more people with us
Because we
uh,
did not have any unity.
could exactly so at that point of time the whole country was divided into very smaller
Yeah.
provinces so I think that obviously that and also vision क्योंकि कभी किसी ने अपने लैंड के बाहर सोचा ही नहीं विजन
Yeah.
ही नहीं था तो इंडिया को हम इंडिया नहीं समझ सकते बैक देन इट वाज इन इंडिया इंडिया इट वाज much smaller places which now uh, मतलब अगेन अनदर थिंग व्हिच यू कैन थिंक अबाउट इज कि अगर ब्रिटिशर्स नहीं आते होते तो इंडिया इंडिया होता कि नहीं इट वुड हैव बीन मच स्मॉलर स्टेट्स क्योंकि हमारे स्टेट्स भी काफी बड़े हैं इन इटसेल्फ एंड वी वुड हैव नेवर यूनाइटेड बिकॉज ब्रिटिशर्स यूनाइटेड geographically speaking they united the country right
And then
so
divided it as well.
हाँ तो the only thing I can think about is कि अगर ब्रिटिशर्स नहीं आए होते तो this Indian subcontinent would have been it would have definitely developed in itself but India की identity India नहीं होती it would have been much smaller countries in itself वो इंडिया नहीं होता but राजस्थान में भी एक अलग स्टेट होता उसका कुछ अलग नाम होता but it would have been a completely different um, entity in itself or east अलग entity होती but हाँ development तो I'm damn sure we would have developed at our own pace which would have been much faster.
Right. So, Acha, what is the name of your podcast?
So I don't host a podcast. I produce shows. So a couple of shows I've done so far. The first one is Perishable Wisdom, and it's in collaboration with Shamal Vallabhji. So he's a very famous sports coach, and he's worked with very big cricketers. He's good friends with like very famous coaches. And another one I did was Tales from Heads, and that's hosted by a very well-spoken person, Prakash Iyer, and he used to work for Hindustan Unilever, and then he went ahead and he was also at a very high managerial post in some other company. So that show is about all these corporate big people and how have they climbed the ladder and how do they work and what can we learn from them as people who are also like starting to make our careers.
Right.
And a couple of more. So another thing I'm producing right now is on sex education, which we really very badly need because there are not good sources out there for sex ed. And that's with Aranya Johar. So she's the one who went viral for that spoken word poem on gender. I don't know if I'm damn sure you must have come across it, but yes, yaad nahi rehta hai. And like a couple of more. So I'm doing another show on dogs and pets in general, and how you can learn to take better care of them.
Right.
And there's another one on PCOS. So a lot of women, whoever is listening to it, I'm sure you or your friend or somebody you know must have suffered through PCOS. So that's something that once you have it for lifelong. So it's a disorder. So it's polycystic ovarian syndrome or disorders. I'm messing up the name, but it has something to do with your hormones and your ovaries and overall, like it affects your fertility and whatnot. So I'm doing a show on that. So a lot of, podcasting is something that's just picking up, now, and so many people want to listen to it, and so many people want to create their own podcasts. So yeah, it's great producing these shows that I know that people will love to listen to at some point. So
Yeah. So it was very nice talking to you, and
it was great talking to you as well.
next time, hope we can talk about biology.
Definitely. I'll read up
Okay, so there was some problem with the connection. Yeah, so I'm saying that next time we'll talk about biology.
Definitely. I have another book, The Selfish Gene, which is a old publication, but it's still very highly regarded as one of
It's a really nice
good.
book. It's on
You've read it?
evolution, right?
So
Yeah.
other three books I read on gene. This book had a lot of references in the other books I've read so far. So I was like, dude, agar is book mein iska reference hai, to I need to read this one as well.
Yeah.
And as I read that one, definitely we can have another conversation, and I can go on and on about that as well. Genes, they're such a fascinating topic in itself, and it plays a role in everything.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if I have to connect, I can connect genes to the book I recommended. That's Early Indians, because that's the relevance, right? That's how you've traced, and that's why we got to know ki kya migration hui thi. And then it comes down to us as individuals as well. So that helped me understand ki how do I function, and what impacts what. And a very interesting piece I read in one of the books, I think that was The Gene by Siddharth Mukherjee, was that homosexuality can be found in genes.
Yeah.
So you can actually inherit it, and it's found somewhere on the X chromosome. So we've zoned it to that much, and we've also pointed out a section of. So genes are just like, it's a continuous stream.
Yeah.
So you can actually zone a section of that gene where you can find it, but abhi itna bhi advanced nahi hai ki tum
complicated,
right?
Yeah.
But then I think again, a discussion that can happen in that sense is that it can go both ways. People who support homosexuality, ya fir they accept homosexuality, can say ki it's in our genes. You can't electrocute us and give us shock therapy ya fir,
or pray the gay away,
and take it away. But then again, the other thing that can happen is that because it's in our genes, people who do not accept homosexuality can try to medically intervene and take it out.
Actually,
So
people who are in the closet and try to resist their urges, they actually develop a lot of mental disorders due to the fact that there is so much stress inside of them, the inner conflict all the time to not act on their urges, which are natural. So
yeah, it's a crazy, if you really try to think about it, it's crazy that these things are a part of us, yet we hesitate so much in just accepting these things as a part of, when we know that it's us. It's not something that has happened to us. It comes from within, and still there is so much negativity around such similar concepts. It's crazy.
Stigma. What can
I think that goes for anything. I think that goes for color. I think that goes for certain body types. I think that goes for your sexuality. मतलब इसका बहुत wide spectrum है, because it's an emotion that humans have. You have to want something, and then if you want something, there has to be something that you don't want. तो वो एक ही coin के दो sides वाली situation है.
Right.
But then it doesn't have to be that way. If you want something, you want it. But if somebody else wants something that's the opposite of what you want, let that person be.
Exactly. Why do you have to like influence them to live your lifestyle? That's what I don't get.
Exactly. But I think itna narrow thought process, itna narrow point of view hai that we, even if we try, we can't think from an objective point of view, which is much broader.
Right.
And some people can do that. There are some people who can do that, but even then, in that case, kabhi we have to train ourselves to see the bigger picture, because we're so used to and accustomed to see things from the like just our point of view.
Right.
Like if I will think, why am I hurt? Instead of that, try to think that okay, you are hurt and that's the reason, but the person who has hurt you, maybe try to understand their situation as well. And once you try to do that, everything makes sense. And then I think that's a much better way to cope with things. That's worked for me personally, for sure. But everybody has their own way. But I think just keep your individual thoughts ek side mein, and keep your objective
empathy, I think.
Thought process एक side में, and then merge both of them. तो तुम्हारा जो point of view होगा ना, वो इतना broad होगा कि you will understand everything. And I think that's the point.
That.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's meet next time.
Great. Definitely, it was great talking to you, and I'm so glad that people my age, I've always wanted to host podcasts, but I've not reached that point yet. But it's so great to see that you wanted to do something, you went out, you started your podcast, and you're doing it. You're bringing stories from regular people. So generally we try to find who is the famous one, या फिर who is the one जिसको expert है कोई, या फिर just like hot shots.
No, but I invited you because you're smart.
No, but I'm still a person. So and I have other episodes as well. So
yeah,
you just call people who have normal opinions and normal point of views, and sometimes even that is refreshing to listen to or see, because we're so in a habit to listen to celebrities talk and rant about their bullshit problems, या फिर we consume news about who is in a relationship with whom, या फिर who cheated on whom, किसकी picture बकवास है, and कौन कहाँ vacation करने गया है. That very often we don't मतलब अगर कोई regular आदमी हमसे बात करे तो it feels underwhelming. And bringing people like you bring on your show, I think that's refreshing in a way, because regular people get ignored on a daily basis.
Don't
so I think that
yeah.
Chalo, theek. It was great having this conversation, and I hope I can come on again.
Obviously.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.